listened to the full 1 hour episode of the Call Her Daddy podcast with Trinity Rodman, and it was so incredible. And I know a lot of y'all have short attention spans and won't listen to the whole thing, but I think her story is one that everyone needs to hear. So I'm going to give you a little Spark Notes version. But first, I'm going to introduce you to Trinity. So I made a video about Trinity, a few weeks ago, because I went to the NWSL championships and I just kind of highlighted her and her career, and she commented on it. Very sweet. But I'm going to kind of explain her background and who she is first. So Trinity Rodman, as you can tell by her last name, is the daughter of NBA Hall of Famer Dennis Rodman. He played with Michael Jordan. He is huge, a very big icon in basketball, but he's known for being a little bit not problematic, but kind of all over the place. He has a super eccentric style. And despite her father's name, she's really made a name for herself in sports. Now, Trinity has been very open about her father kind of being absent throughout her upbringing, but never has gone into explicit detail. And one of the things that she spoke about on the podcast is because she's Dennis Rodman's daughter and she's in sports, people are always asking her questions about her father's involvement in her life and him coming to her games and her style compared to his style. And she kind of didn't know how to answer them because she wanted to be politically correct, and she always wanted to paint her father in a really good light. But that's not the experience she's had with him. Some of her career milestones, just so you know how incredible she is: she was the youngest person to ever be drafted to the NWSL, the National Women's Soccer League. At just 18 years old, she was drafted second overall, which is incredible. She was named NWSL Rookie of the Year in her first season. And for those who aren't into sports, that's a huge deal because she wasn't the number one pick. So that means she really showed out. Then the following year, she debuted with the U.S. women's national team, and she played in the 2024 Paris Olympics. She scored 3 goals. She was a huge part of the team winning gold this year. Everyone knows her because she has this huge standout style on the field and off the field. On the field, she's super athletic, she's fast, she knows how to create a goal out of nothing. She wore pink braids throughout the Olympics, which I was so obsessed with, which as a black girl who wears braids myself, I can only imagine that those would weigh me down, but she just looks like she's floating through the air. She's written a children's book, she's covered magazines, she's really her. And she's kind of become this cultural icon, but that has always had this cloud over her identity and brand because she can't really talk about her personal life because she doesn't want to make her father look bad. So she goes on Call Her Daddy, and one of the first things Alex said is, "You told me before you came on here that this is the first time you've done an interview that wasn't about soccer." Then at the very beginning, Alex is asking her some casual questions do you have any pregame rituals? And she talked about how she has to chew gum. She goes through 3 to 5 pieces of gum during a game, and she's a diva about her gum. She has to have gum when she's playing soccer. Then she talks about how she's always the crazy one in the locker room. She's always super hyped up. The quiet ones in the locker room hate it. She's not sitting there meditating. She's going crazy before a game. She has to stand in the same spot. She has to sit on the same spot of the bus. She's very superstitious about small stuff. She talked a lot about her brother and her brother's relationship with her father as well. A few of the main takeaways. So basically, Alex asks her why she's never talked about her relationship with her father before in explicit detail. And she said that she wanted to protect him and she never wanted to make him look bad. Even when she was younger, they would go to his jersey retirement and they would get styled and they would dress up and they would show up and smile and take photos because he always wanted this image of having his family behind him and his family support and looking like a family man, but he truly wasn't. Her parents got divorced when she was 2 years old. She doesn't really remember exactly when they got divorced, but she knows that it was long and dragged out and pretty hard on her mother. Alex asked her what her toughest living situation was growing up, and she talked about how they had a beat up Ford Expedition and they lived out of her car, and when her mom could afford it, they would live in a motel. And she said that that was one of the most fun times of her life. Her and her brother didn't really realize that it was a bad situation because her mom did such a good job of making it fun for them. So they had a morning routine of getting up, they would get waffles from the waffle maker in the lobby, and then they would go swim in the pool or the hot tub at the motel. And she described that as being so much fun for her and her brother. It was her hanging out with her best friend every day. And then they would go to school. And they lived in Newport Beach, which is a super wealthy area. These kids have money. Think the OC. These are Beverly Hills rich kids by the beach. Imagine that. She talked about how growing up, her brother was her person and she didn't necessarily have a ton of friends. And sometimes she would eat lunch in the bathroom because she would rather eat lunch in the bathroom by herself and force people who don't really like her to like, she wasn't trying to perform for people and make people like her. And she said the kids that didn't really give a fuck about her in high school and weren't very nice to her are all in her phone, like texting her now, like trying to be friends. And Alex was like, fuck them. And Trinity like laughed. It was a cute little moment. She also mentioned that when she talks about hard things, she tends to laugh and giggle and make it a joke because it's uncomfortable for her. And you could tell throughout the podcast that she doesn't really tell this story a lot and that it was a bit uncomfortable for her. I want to commend her also for telling this story because it's rough. I know firsthand as an athlete's kid to talk about these parts of your life that are so, that you kind of put down because you don't want that person to look bad. But at the same time, she said that for her and her brother, it kind of came at the cost of having their own independence and sharing their own story and kind of living a lie. And so I even saw the headlines after the podcast just came out, and all of the headlines are like, Trinity Rodman rips into her NBA legend father. And Alex got into the fact that, speaking about Dennis Rodman, who's like a part of the Michael Jordan era and like a legend in so many people's eyes, kind of ruins that idea for them that this person is such a legend, even though Dennis Rodman was known for like going crazy and partying and bitches and all that. She said at one point her family did try to live with her father. However, he had so many parties and just like random bitches coming over that her mom couldn't have them live there. Like, in seeing that, it just wasn't gonna work. She also mentioned that she believes that her mother is the only woman her father has ever loved and will ever love because she doesn't think that her father truly knows how to love someone correctly because he's so worried about people using him for his money. And Alex asked her if her parents ever fought in front of her. She remembers what their fights would be about. And she said it was always about money. It was always about like, you guys are using me for my money and blah, blah, blah. When she said what they wanted wasn't really the money. They wanted him. And it was difficult for her because, and it still is, because it's her dad. So she still wants this relationship with him. And she says she has times now where she's lonely or having a really hard part of her season and she just wants a hug from her dad. And she can't really get that because she doesn't have a relationship with him. Another thing she touched on is they will go months and months without talking, and he changes his phone number all the time. He never has an iPhone. He just has these random flip phones, and she believes he just like throws them away and gets a new phone number. And so he'll call her. Like, recently he had gone like 5 months without talking to her at all and then was randomly calling her a bunch of times from a Texas phone number. And she only knows it's him because she'll see the voicemails and she'll listen to his voicemails and be like, oh, that's him. But she saw a Texas number and it'll be like spam likely. And she, she's famous. She's not going to answer just like spam calls. And so she answers her father, but she said, and this part broke my heart, like almost brought me to tears. She said that when she answers her father's phone calls, it's not for her. It's not because she wants to talk to him. Like, sometimes she has to sit with herself and decide, like, do I want to go there today? Like, do I want to think about this today? Do I have the energy for this? But she said that because she believes her father is an alcoholic and that, he doesn't know how to love and he has all of these sad moments in his life where people have used him for the money, and her and her family tried to be that safe space, but he just wouldn't let them. She answers his phone calls because she never knows when she'll hear from him again or if she'll ever hear from him again. And if something bad were to happen to him or she were to lose him, she couldn't live with the fact that she didn't answer his call, or she doesn't know if he needs to just hear her voice. And so she picks up the phone and she talks to him and goes through that just because she wants to be there for him. But it's so basically detrimental to her own mental health. She even mentioned that there was a time that he didn't call her for months and then randomly called her asking if she wanted to do a reality TV show with him. She talked about how growing up they had no money, and I think based on what I heard on the podcast, her father wasn't paying child support, and that was just a fight I believe her mother didn't want to have. I don't know the details on that, but she talked about how when he officially lost her mom, it was kind of like he didn't give a fuck. And like the older they got, the less of a fuck he kind of gave about his children. And so they grew up without anything. Like, they didn't have money. And even for small stuff, as far as going to In-N-Out with her friends, like who had money, she couldn't do that stuff. She couldn't go get fast food. She didn't have money for food and like clothes and to keep up with the Joneses, she said. They had nothing. And so her and her brother kind of became each other's best friend because they knew what each other were going through, but they were never really embarrassed. Like, they weren't like, Mom, you drive a beat up car. And she said when they were living out of their expedition, all of the other kids are driving Rolls Royces and Range Rovers and stuff. And she was never embarrassed of the fact that they were living in a beat up expedition and living in their car and in a motel. They would pull up right to the front of the school. She wasn't embarrassed and she was herself, but it was hard because the kids just didn't really understand and weren't really nice to her. She said most of her friends were her brother's friends, but then when he was in different classes from her and they were in a different spot in high school, she kind of had nobody, and that's when she started eating lunch alone in the bathroom. She said that she thanks God that she's talented. Well, she didn't say like, I thank God, but she was like, I'm so thankful that I was talented because one of her club coaches was really who was able to get her through soccer because her mom couldn't afford to stay in these like nice Marriotts at club tournaments and to travel and all that stuff. So her coaches really supported her and her brother as well. And she also touched on the fact that her brother has it a lot harder because dad didn't really know how to love, period, but when it came to her and her mother, he could like give a hug or show affection in a way that he knew how to do. But with her brother, he didn't really know how to show him affection or whether to be touchy with him or to be hard on him. So all he really did was tell her brother how he wasn't good enough or wasn't doing enough. And when it comes to basketball, because he's not his father, Dennis Rodman, this Hall of Famer legend, that he would just never live up to his father's legacy, and his dad kind of treats him like shit because of it. And the internet also treats him like shit because of it. And so he gets all this hate and they can't really answer it because they didn't ever want to make their father look bad. I think because her brother is a man, her dad didn't know how to love him. And the only way he knew how was to be super hard on him. And you could tell that Trinity has a super soft spot for her brother, but didn't really want to speak too much for him. But it sounded like his relationship with his father was really tumultuous. One thing that was a huge moment in 2021, he showed up to one of her NWSL games for the first time. She says it's a quarterfinal game. She's a rookie. It's the biggest game of her life. Like, she's super nervous already to play and to perform well. And her team is playing like shit in the first half. And then she hears a voice, and it's her father being like, let's go Rodman, blah, blah, blah. And she says his voice like rings in her ear. Like, it's like, oh shit, like that's my dad. She says she started bawling, crying. They get like a water break or an injury break. She tells one of her teammates like, my dad's here. And her teammate immediately knows like, oh shit. So then she said her teammate is like, let's just finish out this first half and we'll talk about it in the locker room. In the locker room, she was heartbroken. She was sick because this man had not been to one of her games in like 4 or 5 years. And he shows up in her biggest moment. All the cameras are on his face. Everyone's like, Dennis Rodman's at the game. And she's like, my dad is at my game for the first time 3-4 years. And it's not like he's showing up for me. It feels like he's showing up just because he wants the cameras on him. But after the game, they won. She scores like the game-winning goal. It's huge. She goes up to her father. All of the cameras are around her and she is bawling, crying. And like, he puts his arm around her and she's crying in his arms. We all saw the photo come out, and she posted the photo where she was like crying in his arms, and it looked like this happy daddy-daughter moment. Like, I won the game and I'm so happy my dad is finally at my game. But that's not what that moment is at all. She was so mad at her dad for showing up and taking that moment for her that was supposed to be super joyous and super exciting, but it turned into just like traumatic because all of this trauma from her childhood is coming back up in front of all of these cameras. Then she posted a photo after of the moment where she's crying, and she put a long caption about how, you know, her relationship with her dad isn't the best, kind of trying to drop hints, but still saying like, look, at least he showed up. That's like the least he could do. I'm happy he's there. She said they had a wholesome moment afterwards where they like went and like did a family and friends thing, and they talked and caught up, and it was actually really wholesome. And she really thought after that moment that she had her dad back. Like, she kept referring to her father like he was like this figure in the past, and like she finally had him back and he showed back up for her. But after that, he didn't speak to her for months. So it was confirmation again, okay, he wasn't showing up for me. He was showing up for the cameras and to look good. Just like when she was little and he would show up and she would think that he was back and he really wasn't. As far as the money is concerned, she said that money was like a form of control for him. And instead of when she would ask for like if she did have time with her dad and she was like, I need $100 because like I need food. Like, I literally need food and like basic necessities. And he would be like, I'm going to take you shopping. And he would take her and her brother shopping, and he would buy them phones and clothes and computers and laptops and just like stupid shit. And while those are like expensive material items. She said he needed that moment of swiping the card himself and buying his kids all of these expensive things on a shopping spree, but it wasn't what they really needed because, like I said, they had no money. They're like living in a car and in a motel and they're broke, and their father's buying them an iPhone, and it's like, this isn't what I need. But I think it checked off the box for him that I'm doing the bare minimum for my child. She said that sometimes when her dad calls her, like after a few months, he's usually asking about her mom, like, how's your mom doing? How's your mom? Like trying to slide in, trying to figure out what's going on with her mom, which is why she thinks that he still loves her. But it doesn't really feel like he's calling her to talk to her for her. It's like he's like checking off that box and he wants to know how her mom is doing. It was really complex. It was a really great story. She told it very candidly. You could tell she's angry. There was a moment, I wasn't watching it on video, but it sounded like she got really emotional when she was talking about his alcoholism and how she doesn't want to lose her father, like him to lose his life and her to not have had a relationship with him or like have been there for him. But it's complicated and it's hard for her, and it affects her in every day-to-day interaction in every way in her life. And she said, like, one of the reasons she's speaking about it now is because the media is constantly asking her questions, comparing her to her father or trying to get like an answer out of her, like a wholesome daddy-daughter moment, trying to see him in this light of this NBA legend, but he's not that to her. And so this was her chance to kind of take her story back and to shut down that noise and to stop having to relive her trauma every time somebody is asking her a question about her dad. I absolutely loved it. If you haven't listened to it, please go give it a listen. And I hope she has a long and successful career and that people start seeing her more for her and seeing her story for the reality of what it is and stop trying to force this like daddy-daughter narrative, because we all know what Dennis Rodman was like. And I always wonder with these athletes, like, you know, they have children. So when he's like skipping off to Vegas with models or he's like at fights and like doing all this crazy stuff, where do y'all think his kids are at? And I can only imagine the mind fuck of like, we have no money, but when your jersey gets retired, we're getting sent out on a plane to get styled and wear these expensive clothes and take photos and make you look good. But then you just throw us away after. I don't think anybody should be knocking her for telling her story. That's her reality, and that's the truth of what she lived and experienced. And it's hard to hear the truth about figures that you grew up loving, but I think it's necessary. I mean, we're seeing this is the year and the age of truth, like the Diddies and everything coming out about these celebrities and these weird parties and the way people grew up and the way people get famous and the things people are willing to do for fame. She said that she thinks her father's in love with fame and having people talk about him and having his name in the headlines and having a pretty squeaky clean family man image. And Alex even brought up how in interviews or in speeches, he'll say, my biggest regret isn't being a better father. And Trinity literally bust out laughing when Alex said that, because Trinity said, I can name the interviews where he says that, or I know I've seen the clips of him saying that, but then he doesn't call us. He doesn't do anything about it. So it's like, do you want to be a better father or not? I would love to hear her brother's side of the story. I would love to hear more about what this was like for her or how this affects her in like dating and relationships, because there was a lot of things I related to growing up with a single mother throughout her story, and her even saying like, people being like, oh, how does your dad feel about this? And she's like, I don't know how he feels. I don't know where he is, but I do know my mom is here, and it's like nobody really cares. So I thought it was really great. I'm super proud of her. That's really hard to do. And I'm sure a lot of fire is going to come in the next few days. I'm like honestly scared for her. I hope she's like has the right people around her. And I'm sure she was prepared for that. Thanks for watching. For more Hoops for Hotties, subscribe to the Hoops for Hotties YouTube channel and podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. And keep it locked here for sports news for the girls, the gays, the theys, and the straight men who don't admit they don't know anything about sports. Bye. Love ya. Mean it.